Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our summer series session, The Unexpected Power of Selflessness, Giving Back for Father's Day, presented by the Center for Positive Organizations at the University of Michigan Stephen M. Ross School of Business. I am Julia Lee Cunningham, an assistant professor of management and organizations at Michigan Ross and a core faculty member at the Center for Positive Organizations. I have a few notes before we get started on the technology that we're using today. During our event, attendees are view-only participants and cannot be seen or heard. We have turned off the chat and raise hand features. However, the Q&A feature will be enabled throughout the event, and we encourage you to submit questions and upvote the questions that you would like to have answered. There will be some time left at the end of the event for us to answer a few of your questions. We have also enabled live transcription services for our event, and this feature can be turned on or off using the Zoom settings at the bottom of your screen. And lastly, we're recording this event and we'll post the video on the CPO website as soon as we can. All right, so I am really excited to introduce our speaker today, Richard Louie. He's an award-winning journalist with more than 30 years in television, film, technology, and business. Currently at MSNBC and previously with CNN Worldwide, he's the first Asian American man to anchor a daily national cable news program and a Team Emmy and Peabody winner. He has just completed a wonderful documentary called Sky Blossom on student caregivers in military families that is currently streaming, and which I urge all of you to watch after today's session together. Richard has also led a 15-year business career that involves a fintech patent and the launching of 6 technology brands. But perhaps most importantly, Richard is a proud alumni of Ross School of Business, MBA class of 2001. So go blue. And before I begin my conversation with Richard, and before I let him speak for himself, I would love to show you a short video of Richard and his dad for the next couple of minutes.
If you want to be working in my profession, you do not ask to work fewer days. You do not ask to be on TV less. But at least I could still do what I love to do in work and still do what was most important to me, which was to care for my father. I know I'm lucky.
This day, we just have some new information on the breaking news story, the mass shooting coming out of El Paso, Texas.
I will work from Friday to Sunday, finish at 11 p.m. on Sunday. Monday, I get up, go to the airport, and then arrive in San Francisco, door to door, 10 hours later. And then on Friday morning, I'd get up, fly back to New York, go to work. And that was the way it was in the beginning. Now that he's in assisted care, I don't come back as often. I come back maybe once every 3 weeks or twice every 4 or 5 weeks.
I feel guilty. Have I been visiting enough? Is he upset with me?
Hey there, young fella. How are you?
I'm Richard, your son. See, Richard, your son. Yeah? Got it?
Okay.
Thank you. You look good too.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go.
I try to give him comfort. I'm there to do the best can be done.
That was a great video. I love that I was able to see so much care and so much love between you and your dad in the video. So thank you so much for sharing the video with us today. And thank you so much for being here today to share your stories. I would love to ask you to tell us more about yourself and your upbringing above and beyond all of your wonderful accomplishments in life. What was your relationship with your parents like as you grow up, and how did your parents model this like selflessness for you as you grow up?
Julia, thanks for, first of all, taking the time today to chat. And I cannot thank the Center for Positive Organizations and the entire team that has gathered today, as well as the inspirations for this conversation through Jane Dutton, who has been a Sherpa, if you will, of being an important citizen and resident of our both corporate community, but as well as our community writ large. And the video of my father's, he's now in year 8 of Alzheimer's, and as many of you know, we have not seen any sort of solution come forward pharmacologically in better part of 2 decades. And the fact that we had something come out on Monday that possibly is even a glimmer of hope, and I know that there's discussions on both sides of how good it might be, but for folks who are out there caring for a loved one, and there are over 53 million in the space, there are over 5 million children, 17 and younger, that are family caregivers as well, as you allude to in the movie. All of us look for that glimmer of hope, that little bit that can help the person that we're caring for and that we love. And in this case, for my father, that drug is too late to slow what has already ravaged his brain. And if there is one thing that I think inspires our conversation today, when we're thinking of a very an idea that's way above my pay grade about selflessness, it is that rediscovery of what I might be as a person that's contributing to society in my little way. And because he gave me so much along the way. I just saw him for the first time last week again, and I haven't been able to, he likes, as you saw in the video, he likes when I grab his hand or I put my hand on his forehead. He's very much responsive to physical touch, which is great, and as well as to sound. And so I've been able to do that in probably like a year and a half. And there's so many of us around the country and around the world who have not had that physicality that is so basic. But those basic things along the way in the last 8 years are what have informed me about the decisions that I've made in the very same time period. And what kind of decisions? I think a lot of us, especially when we go to a great institution like Michigan, it is a time where we rediscover what are the goalposts, right? They move, they go to a different place, they get closer, they get far away. You might even have 2 or 3 goalposts, right? You had 1 before, now you have 3. In the last 8 years, and I've had to reevaluate what those goalposts are 3 or 4 different times. Just like when I was at Michigan, I came in with 1 set of goalposts, and then I had another one a year later, and another one a year later. But that's what happens when your brain is cracked open. As I have said in many a Michigan event, that's what happened. I did not go to Michigan to become a journalist. I went there to work in business, in strategy consulting. But, and this is later in our conversation perhaps, but it's because of me going to Ross and why that culture brought me to where I am today. And so pulling it all together about, my background and the video we just saw, it has certainly been informed by my father in a way that has kind of jolted my system so many different ways, in a similar way that it jolts your system when you're at a place like at Michigan, and the people you meet, the ideas that enter your brain.
I am so glad that you mentioned something about Michigan and how it kind of transformed your way of thinking. Can you give me some more examples so that I can tell my students over and over?
Yeah. First of all, drink from the fire hose, think big and think practically. And all of those are culturally great syncs with Michigan and Ross. As I was mentioning, I went there because I wanted to move from small tech startups into Fortune 500, to move from local businesses or regional business into MNCs, right? And move away really from what is small to maybe SME or Fortune 500, and to move into strategy consulting. And all of those things happened. I wanted more international experience. I wanted to do a semester abroad at ESA, which at the time still is one of the great business schools of the world. And William David Institute at WDI, I wanted to do one of their summer fellowships. That was there too. The one thing I didn't want to do here, Julia, is I did not want to do another startup. Did not want to do it. That is not why I went to Michigan. And guess what Michigan did to me at the end of my first year, because of a map project and Andy Lawler. At the end of that map project, I wanted to do a startup again with Citibank. And that was not why I went to business school. But that fits into that idea of your brain getting cracked open and letting yourself do that, not in an impetuous way, but in a very purposeful way. And the tools are all there. It was said so many times that the university itself was not a tech university. I come from the Bay Area, right? And yet, guess what? It certainly was a tech university, a tech institution of higher education, because we started a fintech model that was the first of its kind in the world, which we patented together for 5 Ross grads going to Citibank and starting this thing in our second year. All of these things were not what you thought it was. And that parallel to Michigan is a lot like my experience with my father. It's not what I thought it was and what it was going to be. But here we are talking, you and me, Julia, and you and I are talking, and that in a space that is kind of crazy for me to be talking about, which is the topic of selflessness, to talk about a movie that's about young caregivers. All these things, just not what I thought it was going to be. And that's a lot like what you'll experience when you go to a great institution like Michigan and when you invest in family.
So hearing what you told me about your experience at Michigan, you sound like somebody who is very, very focused and organized and planned and in making every decisions that you encounter in life. But you were ready to walk away from your dream job to help take care of your father with Alzheimer's. This decision deeply resonated with me. I also had to take some time off during my doctoral program to help my family. And to this day, I'm very grateful for my advisor and friends who supported me through that time. But I was fortunate enough that I did not have to entirely walk away or choose one or the other. But I can imagine that it would be a very, very difficult choice for many people to make, especially the ones who are very focused on their careers, right? And unfortunately, Alzheimer's runs in my family. So I've lost my grandfather, my aunt, with that particular disease. And so your story very, very much deeply affected me. And so I am curious to hear how you reached the decision. Was it more of a decision compelled by your intuition that I must do this and it just has to be me and no one else? Or did you make a list of like pros and cons as a strategy consultant and make the optimal decision? Was it more cognitive or an emotional one?
Yes, it was all of those. And so I have this large Word document that I've called my career log that I started right after Michigan to kind of plot out and think on paper what I want to do in the future. So that I'm not always going to my advisor or my mentor with an idea that hasn't been at least put down on paper and thought about. We don't, it's funny, we do that with a lot of what we do professionally and educationally, but when it comes to the personal stuff about our career and the things that we care about and getting done in life, that we don't put it down and we don't lay out the steps and the processes. I did that. And so it was both cognitive and emotional, and the way that I had chosen Michigan as well. And it was a good balance. You know, I had all these spreadsheets when I was choosing Ross versus other schools and opportunities. And, you know, what ruled it over was certainly, because if all things were equal, it came down to the emotion, the how I felt about the decision. And so going from what we say is an 8-day-a-week job in journalism down to part-time or 3 days, and asking not to be on TV was something that I thought about, but I knew in my gut I had to make it work. And so I just had to figure out the right rubric that said it would work. And once I found that rubric, that's interesting, right? It's a lot like strategy consulting. You might have a problem, and then you back into the solution, right? Or there's a solution, you back into the solution, excuse me. And that is similar to what I did with this. I had this problem, and then I had to find a solution that I thought would work, which is the part-time. Then, okay, around that solution, what were the structures that would fit that and support it? And a lot could be said that was not a smart decision to leave, especially when at that point in my career, you could either go up or you could go flat or you could go down. And you would maybe wonder, did you leave stuff on the table again? And I had a boss Yvette Miley, who very experienced and respected executive editor, senior vice president over at MSNBC and NBC News at 30 Rock. And I go into the office and I tell her, I've thought about this, Yvette. And what I didn't say out loud was, I know that you can probably say you're a great guy, but you know, this doesn't work. When things change, come on back. You know what I'm talking about, Julia, when you talk with your advisors as you were working through your thesis and PhD, you went through a similar experience, and you don't know what's the answer, but you know, you have to face it. And she turns to me and goes, I'm a long distance caregiver too. And so let's figure something out. And that idea of a positive organization, a compassionate organization, is the opening that we have today because of the last year. But I saw an inkling of that 6 years ago when she did not respond with, she didn't go like this, well, Richard, thank you. She didn't do that. Instead, she was like, let's figure this out together. Let's do this together. And so I was writing, and I gave her a copy of the book, and I was writing the little note in there. And sometimes you'll stop and go like, what do I write? You know, what's the right thing to say? This did not have any stops or pauses. I wrote, said, Dear Yvette, thank you for changing my life. I was like, whoa, that is big for your boss. I mean, that's like, woo, you know, that's, but the reason why I felt very comfortable in doing that was because it was the truth. If she did not say yes, I would not have been able to continue in this profession, to continue to care for my family in a way that my dad and my mom needed it. I wouldn't have been able to explore different spaces of expressing caring for other people. And the movie is really an expression of how do we care for other people? And the book is really an expression of how do we care for other people? If she had not said yes, I would not have, I wonder where I'd be. But she really did change my life that way. And I think if we can reevaluate some of the decisions that affect others and how it could happen that way, and probably has, but we may not have heard, that might, I think, make us think twice about the decisions that we make when we think organizationally, the true impact these, what appear to be medium or small level decisions that aren't strategic about expenditures or about business units or about work processes. That's I know a little bit little squishy, but I think especially over the last year, we've realized it's no longer that squishy.
Nothing wrong with being squishy, by the way, at least within the context of me and
Yes.
this particular audience.
Right.
To me, what you just told me and what I read in the book, it's a really good example of selfless leaders and compassionate leaders making a positive difference. Your boss's response and the compassion that she bring to the table and the flexibility that she was able to give you was really life-giving, and I'm glad that she responded that way. So based on that experience, how could businesses and organizations or managers and employees together continue to cultivate this kind of culture of compassion? So that's sort of my next question to you. Do you have any advice for the managers in the position similar to you or similar to her position, especially now that the businesses are bringing people back and we're envisioning this post-pandemic workplace? What do you think that we could do to sort of give more flexibility and make it work for everyone?
Julia, from a layperson's perspective, an outsider's perspective, and not currently necessarily a Fortune 500 business practitioner, I would say we've lived through, just to think back to our case studies, that we have now lived through over a year of Industry 4.0 and what that might be. And we don't know what the lessons are. We don't necessarily have the case studies out there at the moment. But we have gone through something absolutely that's changed the way we do business. So when we think about Industry 4.0, it definitely is a more compassionate and giving and caring and embracive and holistic revolution, if we can call it an industrial revolution 4.0. And I think if I were an organizational leader in the spaces that often revolve around Ross and the leaders years after business school become and are, is that, let's take it on as any other great movement. When we started with chief technology officers and we think about, chief selfless officers or chief compassion officers, or those who can now look at what we just learned and codify it, and then select and see where it can be used moving forward. Because I think through that exploration and that archaeological approach to the last year and a half, there will be some real metrics that prove, not in all cases, but in many cases, this works. And one example for me personally, working at 30 Rock, is, being network television, we have crews that are on set, we have makeup artists, we've got wardrobe, we've got producers, we've got broadcasters like myself, we have field reporters. All of that went from 100% to less than 5% on headcount in the building. And we did that at great cost organizationally. We did it in ways that required us to care for our employees in ways that we didn't before. If you were to contract COVID, you had a hotline. The organization would then assist you in finding the right solutions to the best of its ability. It was working with the healthcare system and assisting its employees as teammates. It would be able to keep us on air at the same schedule that we did before. Somehow within a week or two, we were able to do that, to maintain the safety of its employees in a way that we never had to do before. We would be responsible or concerned about the way you got home and the way you came back. And all of those muscle sets weren't for a blink. They were for months and over a year. Now hitting year 2, we're in year 2. And I think that muscle set is it's there. We just haven't figured out what it can do. Can it lift 50 pounds? Can it lift 1,000 pounds? I don't know the answers to any of that, but I think those are some of the opportunities. And moving into the space of what you and I started talking about is, think about not only that, that sort of exercise internally, because there truly are some learning lessons. There certainly are some benchmarks and best practices. And you and I should talk again, because I'd love to hear what those case studies are that are being put out by great institutions like Ross and Harvard and others, because I think those will be very instructive, real practical case studies that aren't based on all qualitative. And one last item is, right before the pandemic hit, I was pitching a caregiver's ERG at 30 Rock. And because what I found is that the more I talked about caring for family, people were coming to me. And it's not to ask for more fringe benefits, if you will. It is merely to be human and breathing, that you would have a space to talk about your caregiving best practices personally and your experiences. That there's so many amazing things that can come from that. And then finally, my double final is, in chapter 17, I talk about gratitude and the gratitude and the ability for leaders to affect outcomes and not be. So yes, gratitude is just good generally. And whenever I'm offering any sort of metric outside of just that it's the right thing to do, we can also qualify it by saying, when leaders show gratitude to their teams, when efficiency goes up 50%, when being a caring and selfless employee means that over a 14-year period, you can double your overall income. These are all things that say, yeah, it's the right thing to do. But it's also, if you're thinking about purely the selfish reason to do that, because the book is really about self-help, but it's an anti-self-help book. Those pieces of information are very, very important.
Well, there's so many interesting aspects of your work experience and your encounters with your former boss as well that I loved reading about. For this audience, what will be particularly interesting, I think, is the story of you learning from Mike Breslin. Is that Mike Breslin? Yes,
that's right.
You mentioned in the book that your experience of working with him and observing his compassionate and selfless ways of managing people had a great influence on how you also manage others, including Alex. And I also remember reading about how that also ended up affecting your decision to offering to take a 20% pay cut when you heard reports of a general 3% cut in your workplace. So can you tell us a little bit more about how you came to that decision?
Yeah. Why would anybody offer a 20% pay cut?
Exactly.
Well, and I'll start with that only. So what happened, Julia, that you're talking about in the book is I expressed the power of mentorship, both directly, explicitly and implicitly. And why was I offering a 20% reduction in my salary? It's not like I make that much money. It was more that I knew that as a giving and taking team, an organization and its employees, I knew that they'd given me so much, huge amount of care for my journey and what I wanted to give back. And it's not because my little bit was going to make a huge difference for a large company like ours, but I felt it was the right thing to do, and I could make the adjustments. My agent said, don't be silly. They don't do it. I said, are you sure? Because I would really like to do this. And he said, no. And so leaving it up to him, because he is my guide, I ended up not doing it. But I seriously, I wrote that email and I said, let's see how we can do this. Now, the reason why I think I believe that way of the give and take is my first job out of college, which was working at a pneumatic technology company, and my boss was Mike Breslin. Mike had employee count of like 10 people. And by the time I left 4 or 5 years later to go to Michigan, he had 50. And along the way, we lived through a couple recessions. And what he did along the way, which I've only found out later, because we all had took a pay cut about 30% at that time. And we were all grumbling, we were upset. And I later found out when I was talking with him that he reduced his salary to zero. And it's not because he was a wealthy man, that this was a high value, high income company. It was not. And he never told anybody. When he decided to create a 401k program for our company, again, we were only 40 people at that time. As you all know, economies of scale, you do not create a 401k program for a 40 employee company. It is just way too expensive. Mm-hmm. But he knew that's what he wanted to do for us. And when I would go into his office every day to review my marketing plan with him, he was a tall individual, about 6'3". I'm about 5'10". And he had this big desk. And every single time I'd go in to sit with him, he would be on his desk on the side, and then he would turn, and then he would reach to the side of his chair, and then he'd go. And every single time he'd lower his chair. But it wasn't like he told me I was going to do that. All of a sudden we'd be talking, and then he'd hit the button on the side, and all of a sudden, zoop. And that's always a funny sort of look. And I was like, why is he doing that? And so, about 3 years into my 5-year job, I said, Mike, I just curious, is this sort of, are you trying to make me laugh? Or what are you doing? And he said, in a very straight way, in a very innocent way, I said, well, no, it's because, I want to be able to see you eye to eye. And that's what I'd like to do. And so when I think of all the compassion points and selfless points that he hit throughout the 5 years, and he never brought them up. He never said, oh, this is the way you got to be, and blah, 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 blah. I finished that chapter by saying we all need to lower our chair, because that's what we are. It's human to human. And the way we practice, the way we run our businesses, is we have to lower our chair. And that's the way we can get there. And so during this last recession, during COVID, when one of my teammates, his job wasn't working out, his name's Alex, and his job got pushed off. Mm-hmm. It's not like this, the movie necessarily, and the production company had, lots of income again. Mm-hmm. But I knew that at that point, given what he had given to the project, that we had to take care of him. So without thinking twice, we offered him a salary to offset the gap that was going to be happening because of COVID, and his new offer that had to be put aside. It was the right thing to do. And it was a lesson that I learned many years before from Mike. And when I gave him the book and I told him about the chapter, he's like, I don't know who this guy Mike is, but he doesn't seem real.
Wow, that's such a beautiful story. And I really hope that people who are listening to this call today can sort of emulate the similar behavior as a business leader, so that we can continue to have more positive organizations where employees and employers both thrive together. I would like to hear more about how you sustain your energy as a caregiver. And it is one of my research topics as well. So for a selfish reason, I would love to hear more about that. We know this term that was very common when describing people who are in the role of caregiving, which is compassion fatigue, right? We know that it could be very depleting to individuals who are in that role. What I loved about your book is the sense of humor that I saw in every chapter, and you seem to embody in person as well. It really it brought me smiles, even as I emphasize with your pain and struggles as you take on more and more difficult responsibilities in this role. So to what extent do you think your sense of humor helped you sustain perhaps maybe your sense of optimism? Do you have any advice for our listeners and millions of Americans who are in this caregiving role to sustain that energy?
Yeah, there's a couple levels, Julia, that I would look at it. Personally, when we reach that point of not good return, giving too much, right? You talk about compassion fatigue, or the level of unmitigated selflessness reaching such a point that it is unhealthy. You may or may not see the indicators, the lack of sleep, the depression, the anger, change in appetite, though all those things. And there's a little, I'm such a B school nerd, like in the book, I definitely approach the book like a business book. And so I have all these little scoring systems in there pulled from scientists and people that are way smarter than myself, but I knew that their stuff was good. Is, be very, we can give too much, personally, person to person, and you'll come and go. So when you reach the low point, it's not always going to stay there. When you reach the high point where you can handle it, it's not going to stay the same. In my 6-7 years of going through this with my father, I've had high and low points. I've had times where I am absolutely fatigued. I would typically get off at 11 p.m. on Sunday, get off air at 30 Rock, go home and take a nap. And then at 3 a.m., I'm standing on a subway platform to get out to JFK on a Monday, and then get on a flight that is 6.5 hours and arrive then at my parents' house, and then watch and do the caregiving duties of food and poop is what I call, and sleep as well. All those things I had to take care of. And yeah, you can really feel fatigued. You can really feel like you are giving too much. And the way I got around it was, number one, to talk about it. We sometimes think, oh, am I being weak? Maybe I don't get it right. I don't want to talk about that. But it's to talk about it. So like you and I talking right now is very therapeutic to me. And when folks ask me a question, as I'm sure you've got many a time too, Julia, how are you doing? I really try to stop and answer that and really evaluate it, and not try to be, oh, I'm fine. Yeah. I'd really try to answer it. And unless I felt that there would be deleterious effects of saying it to a person like you, I would be as honest as possible and just say, here it is. And I think the more we can do that, not in a mean way, but in an honest way, organizationally and personally, we get to a better place. Like I'm fine doesn't work. So that was one way personally, Julia. I can talk about organizationally what I think about giving too much, but yeah, personally, that's the way I dealt with it.
Before you could talk about the organizational one, I thought it was really interesting that you kind of moved from the small talk, right? The engaging in a small talk, or like the customary way of interacting in America, at least. So I came here as an international student, and I grew up in Korea. So English is my second language. And when I first came, and when people said, ask me, how are you doing? I didn't know that I was supposed to answer, I'm fine, how are you? Right? And so I would actually answer in a very honest way. Actually, I'm not doing good today. Or I would answer it in a almost like way too genuine way for people to handle. And so over time, I realized that maybe that's not how I should respond. But hearing you talking about having deep conversations with each other makes me think that maybe that's how we should be engaging in conversations with strangers and with people you work with.
And the one, I'm so glad you shared that, Julia, because it doesn't, being very honest and very thorough and vulnerable to up to a point, right? These are not all absolutes, and this is not all situations. But sometimes it doesn't mean duration. It does not mean duration. So how are you doing? Sometimes it's just the way you answered the person. Like, I got to see my dad for the first time and touch him for the first time in a year last week. It was And then you can segue off, but you give them the opening to either respond or move on. And then you could go, but let's get back to that. But I do try to give it my all. Like I'm just letting you know I'm ready, but don't feel like you have to, but I'm going to give you my honest answer, because we want more of that, not to the point again where it becomes deleterious, but to the point where we figure out when it's not good. Because I think we stay so far away from it that we're not moving forward in a way that is productive. And we've seen how when we've actually learned in the last year that moving closer to that line is better for business. We have learned in the last year that moving closer rather than away from that line is better for business.
Why do you think that people don't do it enough though? Like that, having that conversation, I think on my end, for example, I would be worried that if I start a conversation with something that sounds not so positive, maybe that violates that kind of workplace norm of being that upbeat, positive individual. So that would be my guess. But why do you think that people don't really go there when they can?
I guess I bring up two things. Number one, we like wins. And if this conversation doesn't work well, that's a loss. The thing is, no, let's go for the wins and the productive losses. And so it's okay not to get it right every time. I'm going to try. And if it don't work, then I got to learn from it. I can't keep on trying if it doesn't work and not look at the data. I got to keep on remembering, why. So yeah, we're afraid of, as you know, not succeeding, and it's okay. This is an important thing. It's worth it. On a larger level, we're living through a selfish pandemic. We're living through a time where violence and hate is cheap. We're living through a point where, because of that very dynamic, we'd rather be mean than nice. We're also worried if we are being nice that somebody might respond meanly. And I say that from a journalist's perspective, given the number of reports that I have to be on air as a breaking news anchor. I can be on for hours talking about one killer that has taken 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 lives, elementary school students or high school students or college students, or everyday workers killed randomly. And seeing all of that selfishness, the epitome of it. When you look about racial strife, and one of my first stories being Rodney King, and then Freddie Gray, and then Eric Garner, and Michael Brown, and George Floyd, and I'm standing in the street as a reporter saying the same thing over and over again. We're living through a selfish pandemic. We're living through that space where it is way too much about me. And that's a big reason as to why, when it comes to sharing these things, a simple conversation you and I are talking about, whether it be, in the streets personally or at work, we don't go there because the culture is way off on one side.
That's it's a wonderful segue into my question about the rise of anti-Asian hate crimes. And as I mentioned, I didn't grow up as Asian American, and so I still have a lot to learn about what happened in the past and what people's lived experiences are. You wrote an article about how you did not say anything when your father was struck to the ground, which must have been incredibly painful experience for you. Can you say a little bit more about this experience, which unfortunately is becoming increasingly common for many people who are Asian Americans?
Yeah, my father was 83, so it's about 4 or 5 years ago, and the emergency room calls us. My dad, as living with Alzheimer's, he would take his walks, and we liked that because it kept his brain working. He would do routine is always good for those living with Alzheimer's, as you know, Julia. And one of those, and we'd worry, would he remember how to come home? We got the call. Instead, it wasn't that he couldn't remember how to get home. The doctor in the emergency room says, your father's telling us he was doing his walk and he got pushed to the ground. And he told us, I don't know why the man pushed me to the ground, and then he ran away. And my dad was okay, good thing. And I don't know whether it was racially motivated or not. It was during another bout of anti-Asian incidents in the Bay Area of California. And I didn't say anything about it. But I did now, better late than never, as they say, 5 years later in that op-ed in the San Francisco Chronicle. And I got to say, here I'm a reporter that's supposed to be shining light on stories that need to be told. And here was one that was right in front of me, and I didn't say anything. And I think that was not only an important thing to share, but also say as to why do we have in 1 year's time, from March 2020 to March 2021, why do we have over 6,600 reports of anti-Asian incidents? That's huge. It's a gargantuan leap. Of course, we don't have a lot of data on it, but it's a huge leap. And why is it that is there? It's a lot because we're not reporting it. And number two, there's not a lot of people that recognize that it is actually there. And number three, that there is more happening now against our Asian American Pacific Islander community. And it is so saddening. And unfortunately, it's not that one community. It is many communities that we have seen, those who are underserved, those who are communities of color, those who are of diverse communities. And why that happens is there's a lot of reasons behind it, which I can describe, but that was my immediate reaction to answer your question.
So given that you have covered this racial strife in the field for 25 years, what do you think that can be done to collectively heal from this experience and institute a change toward a more equitable, more inclusive future?
Woo-wee! There's a whole bunch there, but one of the things I think personally we can do is to make a list of 3 people that we could never see ourselves ever hanging out with. Of course, if you go to Michigan, you hang out with everybody, right? Everybody wants to go to Dominic's and hang out. But I'm saying, make a list of 3 people you'd never hang out with, and take them to the brown jug, wherever your brown jug is, and hang out 3 times. And it was proven through research over at Stanford, which we explore in the book, that all the indicators, qualitative and quantitative, quantitative being the things you understand, dopamine, oxytocin, cortisol measurements, showing race-related discomfort. Let's say you and I just don't like each other because of our races, you and me. It showed that if it was at 100% before, after those 3 meetings, it went to just above 0. That is something we can do on a day-to-day basis, is make that list of 3 people we can never see ourselves having lunch with, and then go have lunch with them one at a time, 3 times. I bet, and I bet you when you look at that from the perspective of, well, in business, when you have that one individual that comes to you and goes in the team, I was unable to convert that sale. I was unable to convert that JV. Did you have 3 lunches with them? And I bet you if the answer is yes, the hit rate will go higher, and if it's the other way around, the hit rate will go lower. And so there's a lot of applications to that very idea. When it comes to other things that could be done organizationally, where are the faces in your boardrooms and your corner offices that look like me and you? Where are they? Are they there? Why aren't they there? Now, if the answer is because they A-okay, they are A-okay, there's nothing wrong. They got those Asian American Pacific Islanders. Well, that's not true, because that's falling into the idea of model minority. Everybody should know what model minority in the term is. Google it, look it up, because you need to know it to know not to use it or think it. And one of the things about the idea of model minority is that they're the good minority. They are the American minority. Then if they are, then what's the opposite of that? It is the bad minority. It is the un-American minority. There's no such thing as that. Yet that exists, I think, in business, and exists in culture outside of business. Because Asian American Pacific Islanders put their head down, do their work, and get it done, and they don't say anything. Well, that's not altogether true. Like I come from a family that grew up on food stamps. I got kicked out of one high school. I almost did not graduate from high school altogether. I worked in food and beverage at fast food for 5 years before being fired, before going to City College of San Francisco. I do not fit what that model, whatever minority thing is. In fact, 50% of Asian American Pacific Islanders go to community college. So they're not model. But let's say they are model, then therefore that means you get all the good stuff, right? Because you're the good ones. That means you do get into the corner offices. You are on the boards, right? If you're the good stuff. You don't get beaten up like you're inhuman, that you're subhuman. You don't get screamed at with racial epithets so regularly. That's not true as well. So there's a whole bunch of things that says model minority is a myth. And I've given some of the ideas out there. That very structure puts one community of color against another. And we don't need that. We do not need that idea because it's not true. And so I think that big idea, we all need to know it so that we can reject it. And the way we can reject it day to day is don't let the little microaggression go by. Oh, you're good at math, or where are you from? Do not ask a person that looks like me where I am from. And do not say that I'm good at math. And if you see somebody saying that, stop them. And we hear those sorts of statements being made in the streets and in businesses all the time. And it's time for us to stop. It's time for us to check people very nicely and just say, that's not the right thing to say, please stop.
Perfect. That's, I cannot agree with you more on all of the points that you raised here. I especially love the idea about 3 lunches. Academics call this idea of extending your moral concern to include others who may not be similar to you. It's called a moral expansiveness. So you're expanding your moral circle to include others who are dissimilar to you. And that is one of the things that I try to teach in my classroom. So since we're about time, I would like to go to the next question on your project. What other project are you working on now, now that you're really, really passionate about? I'd love to hear that.
Well, thanks for asking that. This whole last year has required's the wrong word, has taught me to completely rejigger the big things I want to get done. And just like my brain got busted open when I was at Michigan, as I was telling you about, just as it has been with caring for my father, the last year in my reporting as a journalist has really changed what I would like to do for my personal projects. And so after the first movie, which was on young caregivers across the country, the second movie is going to be on the hidden wounds that some of us live with. And so we're raising money for that right now. And we're in edit, and that should come out in November. The third movie that, again, is the personal project, which was going to be on the history of caregiving, because history of caregiving actually is from the start of our union and has a big military influences in terms of the way we take care of people. That shifted to now looking at, well, the model minority myth and how it has affected those of Irish descent and those of Italian descent, those of African descent and Asian descent, and it has been there. And so that is now the hot project for me that I must get done because now is the time to do it. So we're raising money for that as well. And then the next book will be on, you can probably guess, the Selfless Inc. or Selfish Inc. While I do spend a good part of the first book on Selfless Inc. But it's more of an individual perspective. This is going to look more organizationally about Selfless Inc. to move away from Selfish Inc.
Wow, you have a lot of exciting projects coming up, and I look forward to following up with our audience with all of these projects so that we can follow you along this journey. So thank you so much for such a candid, heartfelt conversation. that we had. It was truly, truly inspiring to hear your story. And I'm sure all of us grew our selfless muscles a little bit today through hearing your story. Again, Richard's book, this one, Enough About Me, is a wonderful gift to all of us who want to do good in the world, but don't really know where to start. And so this is such a practical book, but also deeply, deeply, deeply personal, that I highly, highly recommend that all of you to read. To those of you who are listening right now, thank you so much for joining us today. We will make sure to email all of you in the next few days with a link to the video from this event. And if you are one of the winners, book winners, you will receive an email from us as well tomorrow. And lastly, our next session in our summer series features my colleague, Ethan Cross. He will be talking about his new book called Chatter, and this will take place on Friday, July 16th at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. We really, really hope that you can join us then as well. And again, I would love to catch up, follow up with you with those 3 lunches, Richard. And I would love to hear more stories as you tell more of your stories in the future. I know it's very, very early, but happy Father's Day, everyone. Happy Father's Day to you too. Okay, well, that's about it.
Thank you,
thanks,
Julia.
everyone. It was
Thank you to the
wonderful
center.
to meet you.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks
for
to
making
everybody.
this a success. Bye, everyone.